Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are zooming out, way out. We're looking at a topic that, it usually conjures up images of massive container ships stacked like Tetris blocks.
Right, or that colleague who's always posting from an airport lounge in Dubai.
Exactly. While the rest of us are stuck in traffic, we are talking about globalization.
It's definitely a buzzword, but for engineering and geoscience, it's a bit of a loaded gun. It represents this fundamental shift in how the work actually gets done.
You mean it's not just sitting at a desk in Calgary or Toronto anymore?
Those days are fading fast. The reality now is you're dealing with international supply chains, foreign building codes, teams spread across borders, and software that was probably developed in a time zone you didn't even know existed.
Right. So our mission today is to really unpack Chapter 3.1.4 of the source material. The title's a mouthful. Professional accountability in a globalized practice environment.
Basically, we're figuring out what happens to your professional liability when you, or even just your data, cross a border.
Does it stay? Does it go?
Does it get lost in customs? Yeah.
Crucial stuff.
Yeah.
And before we pack our bags and get into the weeds on this, I have a quick request for you listening.
Yeah.
If these deep dives are helping you navigate this maze of professional practice, and especially if you're using them to prep for your NPPE exam, please take just a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep the lights on and keeps these study aids coming.
Absolutely. It makes a huge difference for the team.
Okay, let's get into it. I want to start with a concept I was thinking about. I'm calling it the suitcase principle.
Okay.
Or maybe the lack of one. You know, when people go on vacation, say, to a resort, there's this what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas mentality.
It's holiday mode.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You relax your standards. Maybe you skip the gym, you eat the extra dessert, you don't worry about emails.
Sure.
And I think there's a real temptation to apply that to professional work. If I'm a Canadian engineer standing on a job site in Southeast Asia, have I left those strict Canadian regulations back at the airport?
That is the classic misconception. And look, if you take one thing away from this entire deep dive, let it be this. The holiday mode does not apply to your license.
At all.
Not at all. The source material is incredibly explicit here. The central theme of the chapter is that global work does not reduce professional responsibility.
So the border is basically invisible to the code of ethics.
Completely invisible. Accountability follows the license, not the location. You have to think of your professional status not as a permit for a specific building, but as a backpack you carry everywhere.
Okay.
If you are a Canadian PNG or PGO, your primary directive, protecting the public, acting ethically, it's universal.
So if I'm standing on a site where they've never heard of my provincial regulator and I see something dangerous, I can't just shrug and say, not my jurisdiction.
You absolutely cannot. In fact, the text argues that global work increases the need for diligence.
Increases.
Because you don't have that safety net of familiar local inspectors or the codes you're used to. The burden shifts even more heavily onto your shoulders to ensure safety. You can't take the backpack off just because it's humid outside.
That brings us to a really sticky problem, though. We talk about protecting the public, but public safety is so often defined by local laws. What happens when those laws clash?
Right.
Let's say I'm in country X, and country X says it's totally fine to dump this specific amount of chemical waste into the river. It's legal there. But in Canada, that would be a massive violation.
This is where we get into the most stringent rule. This is a concept that shows up on exams all the time because it really tests your judgment.
Okay.
The rule is simple in theory, but it's harder in practice. When laws differ, you have to comply with the most stringent applicable requirement that protects the public.
So the toughest rule wins.
The toughest rule wins, correct.
Right.
If the foreign law is weaker than the Canadian standard, you stick to the Canadian standard. You cannot use the local law as an excuse.
You can't just say, well, the local inspector said it was fine.
You can't, not if you know that fine locally means unsafe by your professional training.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what if we flip it? What if the foreign country is actually stricter than Canada? Maybe they have higher seismic standards or something?
Then you follow the foreign law. It's a race to the top, not the bottom. You follow whichever rule offers the highest level of protection. The goal isn't just compliance with Canada. The goal is public protection, period.
I could just see this causing massive friction on a job site, though. You're the outsider. The local contractor's been doing it this way for 20 years. It's legal. It's cheap. And then you come in waving your Canadian handbook saying, actually, we need to do it this expensive, complicated way because My ethics say so?
Oh, you will be the most hated person in the trailer. It creates conflict.
Right.
But that's where the professional part of your job title really kicks in. You aren't just there to do math. You're there to exercise judgment and character.
So silence is not an option.
Yeah.
You can't just keep your head down to keep the peace.
No. And sometimes refusal is the only option. If you can't do the job without violating your ethical duty, then you shouldn't be doing that job. That's the hard truth.
That is a hard line to walk. But let's throw another wrench in the works. Contracts.
Why?
We're taught the contract is king. You sign it, you're bound by it.
Right. That's the commercial reality.
So I sign a contract for an international project. There's a clause. This project will be governed by the laws of country Y. And we know country Y has those loose laws. I signed it. Am I not legally bound to follow that lower standard?
This is the aha moment for a lot of people, and it is definitely a trap on the NPPE exam. A lot of people think contract law is supreme.
Yeah.
But in the world of professional practice, contracts do not override professional accountability.
Really? So I can sign a document saying I'll do X, but if X is unethical, I can just say nope.
You must say nope. A professional cannot defend negligent conduct by saying the contract allowed it. Your responsibility comes from your licensure, your relationship with the public trust, not from the piece of paper you signed.
Wow. That's huge because it essentially says your professional status supersedes your commercial agreements.
Precisely. In business, the contract might be king. But in professional ethics, public welfare is the emperor. You can't contract your way out of ethics.
I feel like that should be printed on the back of every engineering degree. You can't contract your way out of ethics.
It would save a lot of people a lot of legal trouble. And frankly, it would save lives.
So we've covered physically going to another country. But let's be real, a lot of globalization now happens without anyone leaving their chair.
Oh, yeah.
I could be in my basement in Calgary working on a project in Dubai, or, more likely, I'm using software from Berlin to design a bridge in Manitoba. The text calls this the importation of knowledge.
The black box problem. This is arguably the most common form of globalization now. You're not importing steel, you're importing code or simulations.
And the temptation is just to trust it. I mean, they're the experts who built the software, right? Why shouldn't I trust the output? It feels arrogant to assume I know better.
That is the danger. Blind reliance. The source material is very clear. Using an internationally developed product does not transfer responsibility to the developer.
So if the software has a bug, or it uses a default assumption about, say, wind load that applies to Germany, but not to a hurricane zone in Nova Scotia.
And the building falls down. You can't blame the software developer. You can't say, well, the app said it was safe. The liability sits with the professional who applied the software.
You're the gatekeeper.
Exactly. You have a duty of verification and validation. You need to understand the assumptions behind that black box. You need to know what formulas it's using and validate that the output makes sense for your specific local conditions.
It's like using a GPS. If the GPS tells you to turn right, and right is a lake, and you drive into the lake.
That's a perfect analogy. You can't sue the satellite company. You're the one driving the car. The software is just a tool.
Okay.
And this applies to foreign standards, too. Just because a standard is international doesn't mean it meets Canadian safety expectations.
Right, because Canada has permafrost in specific seismic zones. A code written for France isn't thinking about minus 40-degree weather.
Exactly. So you have to check, does this standard meet or exceed what we require here? If not, you can't use it, or you have to supplement it.
This sounds exhausting, honestly. It
Right.
implies you have to double-check everything.
It is exhausting, but that's why you have the stamp. That's why you have the license. You are the final line of defense. If it was easy, they wouldn't need a PN to sign off on it.
Fair point.
Mm.
Okay, speaking of lines of defense, let's talk about outsourcing. This is huge. You're the project manager in Vancouver, but the detailed design is being done by a subcontractor in India, and manufacturing is in China.
The global supply chain of services, yeah.
So, if the subcontractor in India makes a calculation error, or the manufacturer in China uses the wrong grade of steel, surely that is on them. I'm paying them to get it right.
You hired them, yes. But did you verify their work? This brings us to the pass the buck fallacy.
Ah.
The text is explicit. Delegating work does not eliminate accountability.
But I can't be everywhere at once. I can't be in the factory in China and the office in India at the same time.
No, you can't. But you're responsible for the risk management. The expert view is that because international work has more unknowns, communication barriers, different norms, you actually need to be more cautious.
So outsourcing doesn't save you from responsibility. It just changes the type of work you do.
Precisely. Instead of doing the calculation, your work shifts to auditing, verifying, and setting up rigorous quality control checks. If you just email the specs and hope for the best, you are being negligent.
If you sign off on it, you own it.
That's it. That is terrifying, but it's clarifying.
It really is. The theme here is that globalization adds all these layers of complexity: language, law, distance. But the core responsibility is a solid rock. It never changes.
It never changes. It just gets harder to enforce.
Okay, I want to pivot to the cultural side of things, the when in Rome trap. The text talks about ethical relativism. Can you break that down?
Yeah, ethical relativism is the idea that ethics are flexible. It's the argument that says, oh, in this country, everyone gives gifts to the local inspector to get the permit approved. It's not a bribe. It's just how business is done.
Or safety gear isn't really a thing here. The workers find hard hats uncomfortable, so I won't enforce it because I don't want to be the rude foreigner.
Exactly. And the source material draws a very hard line here. It says, that is unacceptable. Canadian ethical duties, honesty, integrity, public safety are universal. They are professional values.
But isn't there a fine line? I mean, respecting local customs is important.
That's the distinction. If a local custom is, we take a 2-hour lunch, you respect that. That's cultural. If the local custom is, we ignore toxic runoff, you do not respect that.
Right.
You have a duty to speak up. The text calls it the duty to report. If safety is at risk, silence is not an option.
Even if it costs you the project.
Even if it costs you the project. Now, you can be diplomatic in how you deliver the message. You don't have to be arrogant, but you cannot be silent about hazards.
It sounds like being a professional in a global environment requires a really strong backbone.
It does. It requires confidence and a very strong grasp of why you are there in the first place. You're there to ensure safety.
So given all this pressure, conflicting laws, black box software, outsourcing risks, how does a professional actually manage this without having a nervous breakdown? It feels like a minefield.
It is a minefield, and the text provides a strategy for this. Risk management. It's about acknowledging that the baseline risk is higher, so your precautions must be higher.
What does that look like practically?
It means that when uncertainty is higher, your safety margins need to be higher. The text suggests using conservative design assumptions.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you're sourcing steel from a new supplier in a country where quality control is spotty. You don't design that beam to be at 99% of its capacity. You maybe design it to 80%. You build in a bigger buffer.
You over-engineer it for safety.
Exactly. And you document everything. If you decided to use a foreign standard, write down why you decided it was safe. Get independent reviews.
It sounds like the antidote to global uncertainty is just excessive verification.
I'd say appropriate verification for the level of risk.
Yeah.
The bottom line is, when you cross a border, you don't relax. You tighten up.
I really like that. It flips the whole vacation mindset on its head. When you go global, you don't put your feet up, you put your boots on.
That is it, exactly.
So let's try to summarize this beast. We've covered a lot of ground.
If I had to boil it down, I'd say this. Globalization offers massive opportunities. But for the professional, it separates the labor from the responsibility.
How so?
You can outsource the labor, the drawing, the coding, the manufacturing to anywhere in the world, but you can never, ever outsource the responsibility.
It stays with you?
It stays with the license holder.
Yep.
Whether it's the law, the software, or the subcontractor, the Canadian professional is the final line of defense for the public. You are the filter.
And that applies whether you're physically in another country or just using a tool made there.
Correct. The suitcase principle applies to data just as much as it applies to people.
This has been a really eye-opening look at something that I think a lot of us take for granted. We just assume international means standardized, but it really implies complexity.
It does. And I want to leave you with a thought, something that wasn't explicitly in the text, but is a direct consequence of everything we discussed.
Let's hear it.
We talked about being responsible for our software and our subcontractors. That's tier 1. But think about the supply chain of your decisions. If we are responsible for the entire global chain, do we need to rethink how we vet the very smallest components?
You mean not just the big subcontractor, but the company that made the sensor that goes into the machine the subcontractor is using?
Exactly. How deep does that rabbit hole of responsibility go in a hyper-connected world?
It's a provocative thought. At what point does due diligence become impossible diligence?
That is the question every modern professional has to answer every day. And the answer usually lies in that word we used earlier, judgment.
Well, on that slightly anxiety-inducing note, we are going to wrap up this deep dive.
It's good anxiety. It keeps you sharp.
True, true. Thank you so much for breaking this down for us. It really clarifies a complex chapter.
My pleasure. It is a vital topic.
And to you, listening, thank you for sticking with us. We hope this helps you navigate not just the exam, but your career. Please, before you go, remember to click that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue to make this content so you could be successful on your NPPE exam. We want to see you pass.
Good luck with the studying.
See you in the next